every year, every one of those 7 years because of the mass shooting in Mukilteo. So I can't kind of go on without mentioning, especially my constituent and friend Paul Kramer, who's been a champion. His son was injured during that shooting, and of course lives were lost. Also, just real quickly, also want to acknowledge Senator David Fraucht, who's in the back of the room, who should be up here despite his early retirement, because he has been a champion of the assault weapons ban and so much work that we have accomplished in Washington State. But let's face it, often, when we're out on the campaign trail or we're talking to people and they call us leaders, that's not true. The real leaders are the young people standing behind me, the grandmothers against gun violence, the communities that are rising up to make sure that we do the right thing. I think also, as Attorney General Ferguson said, the legislature and elected leaders are often behind the people. We kind of trail, and this is that case. We need to ban these weapons of war. We've been trying, we've been failing, but I think this is the year to do it because the people are speaking. It seems every mass shooting that happens around the country, I might call or text or email Attorney General Ferguson and say, we're introducing this bill again, right? And of course he writes back, he says, absolutely. I'm sick of sending those messages to him. So this is the year that we have to do it. This is the year where Washington can lead again. Washington, we did great work last year with the high-capacity magazine ban. So proud to have been part of that legislation over, again, 6 or 7 years. So now's the time. Now's the time to get rid of these weapons of war. Now's the time to make our communities safer. Now's the time for people like Sophie to not fear going to school. Thank you, Sophie, for those incredible words. Now is the time to make sure that our community leaders feel safe when they're going to work. And this is how we do it. These simple pieces of legislation. Politically, they might be complicated, but for the people of Washington State, they are straightforward. Get rid of weapons of war. Make it harder to easily access guns when you're in a fit of despair or a fit of anger. Simple things that we can do and we must do this year. And one of those people that has helped champion these things, despite her very few years in the State House of Representatives, another incredible champion, and one that when we get this through will be a leader on gun violence, is Representative Liz Berry.
My son George is a first grader this year, the exact same age as 20 children who were murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary 10 years ago. So George and I talked about this last week before I sent him off to school, because it's important for him to understand why he and his classmates will hide under their desk and practice active shooter drills. I am a survivor. My life changed forever 11 years ago when a gunman opened fire at a constituent event of my boss and mentor, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. 6 people were killed that day, including my friend and colleague, Gabe Zimmerman. Gabe is the first congressional staffer to be killed in the line of duty. My pain inspires my activism. And as a mother and as a lawmaker, I believe we must do more to protect our kids and families than offering thoughts and prayers. And I believe the people of this great state need to know that if we work together, we can do serious things about these serious problems. We have passed in just 2 years some remarkable pieces of legislation to keep people safe in this state. We have pro-gun safety majorities in the legislature, and the voters of this state expanded those pro-gun safety majorities in the House and Senate, and we intend to use them again this year. This session, I will work with anyone who is willing to fight to protect kids and families. No one should be shot to death at work, at school, in their church, or at the grocery store. We will work to pass an assault weapons ban like that killed my friend Gabe. I'm looking forward to working with the governor. I will be prime introducing the permit to purchase bill in the House with a 10-day mandatory waiting period and training requirement. And we will hold the gun industry responsible for all of the families it has destroyed. Because no mother should have to talk to their kid about school shootings like I had to last week with my son George. Thank you. I would like to introduce my friend, Renee Hopkins, the CEO of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Representative Berry. I want to start today with thank yous. Thank you to Reps Hackney and Peterson, Senators Cooter and Peterson, two Petersons, spelled differently, for dedicating the time and energy to sponsor these really important life-saving bills. Thank you to all of our other electeds in the room with us this morning. And yes, a shout out to David Frock, too, without whom we would not be where we are today in Washington State. Thank you to Kiana and Sophie for your willingness to share your stories with us and for demanding action. I know that that's really hard. Thank you to all of the gun violence prevention advocates, those with us in the room today, and the tens of thousands of those across our state who have voted again and again for responsible gun laws, and elected people who will do the same thing in the legislature. And last but certainly not least, thank you to Governor Inslee and Attorney General Ferguson for your years of leadership on this issue. Together, we have really gotten a lot done. Last week marked the 10th anniversary of Sandy Hook. The Alliance was founded in the aftermath of that tragedy. And in the last decade, we have made remarkable progress. We passed 3 ballot measures, sending the message to our legislators that the people are demanding action. And more than 35 community safety bills passed through the state legislature in the past decade. We have written the playbook for other states, and now finally the federal government is starting to follow as well. And we are not backing down. Gun violence is a complex, multifaceted public health issue that requires a comprehensive approach. That is why our 2023 legislative agenda is our boldest yet. We are not backing down because gun violence continues to take a devastating toll on our communities in every corner of Washington State. Rates of gun violence surged in 2020 with the onset of the pandemic, and all initial data suggests that they have not slowed down. We are not backing down because too many Washington families continue to suffer the unthinkable pain that Kiana's family has. We are not backing down because thousands of students like Sophie marched through the streets of Seattle this fall, demanding action to prevent them from being gunned down in their classrooms. And we are not backing down because we know the policies you heard about today will make our community safer. Legislators, Washington expects you to build on the progress you've made. Washington also expects the governor to sign these bills into law. We will not back down because literally lives depend on it. So thank you, everyone, and I think we're going to open for questions.
Yeah, before we do that, I just wanted to come thank you. Before we open for questions, there's 2 comments that I'd like to make. First off, the Grandmothers Against Gun Violence have done such great work. And I want to particularly note one grandmother, Trudy Inslee, who has been with me since I voted for the assault weapon bill in 1994, that was a law of the United States for 10 years and then expired. And then you saw an explosion of mass shootings, most of which are involved with these weapons of war. And we are now grandparents for the 5th and 6th time. And the question for Washington State fundamentally is, are my 2 grandkids, or all our grandkids, going to have to live in a normal Washington that is a scourge of gun violence? We should not accept this as normal. It is abnormal, and we have to act if we're going to change the course of the history of this state. Second thing we haven't talked about today, but we really need to, and that is gun violence to yourself. Taking your life by suicide. Gun violence by your husband or your son or daughter that is caused by the presence of a gun in your home. If there is a pistol in your home, your family members are much, much, much more likely to be injured by that pistol than some intruder in your home. That's the real risk of guns in your home, to yourself, to your husband, to your son. We lost 2 sons of congressmen when I was in the U.S. Congress to suicide by gun. And the presence of those guns that were now available to anyone without an adequate background check, because we don't have time, without any safety training at all to be able to get it,
to talk about how you protect your family from being injured by this gun, how you understand safe storage, how you understand telling everybody in your family how dangerous they are if it's in your house. We don't require any of those things right now. We should. This is a safety measure for the families of the state of Washington against suicide. With that, any of us will be happy to stand for your questions.
Good morning, Governor Inslee. Some of the feedback that we're getting from our platform at Converge Media, we're in the Central District, everything else, is like how committed. Everybody knows that the guns have been everywhere. When I was a student there at Garfield a generation ago, friends murdered, my son, his friends murdered. So, we know there's always been too many guns. They've been out there on the street and everything else. Now, separate from this bill, one thing that you mentioned was investment in resources around mental health and safety. Can you expand upon that? Because a lot of times it's just lip service for our community. And we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And the dollars never make it in there to make a real systemic change in our community.
Yeah. Well, this is a very important point. It's one of the first things I talked about. Look, gun safety regulation, gun safety measures are not the only thing we need to do. And I say this very early in my comments because I think when we talked about gun safety, it ends up buying, now my solution's the only one. And then the other guy says, no, my solution's the only one. No, mental health is the only solution, or gun safety is the only solution. We need to do all of these things with real dollars and real plans. And I can tell you with assurance, we are doing that. My budget I just announced a few days ago has literally billions of dollars to increase our commitment to mental health across the state of Washington, with new hospitals, with new community centers, with new psychiatrists. We're just opened up a teaching hospital. First one in the United States in mental health teaching hospital designed to do that, associated with the UW. And as our Ingram students told me, they are desperate for mental health professionals in their schools. That's why we're putting hundreds of millions of dollars that were both last year and continuing in my budget this year. I'm confident legislators, they've all guaranteed me they're going to vote for my budget. They're not going to change it at all. That they're going to make sure that those dollars get there. So your point is well taken. And go Bulldogs. You got a great Bulldog running the city, by the way, right now.
That's right. Don't forget that.
I won't.
It was your dad, 1955, who was assistant coach, Garfield's first championship.
1955. I have that trophy in my trophy case. I'll send you a picture of it. Who won it in 1969, though? You might want to ask.
Governor Inslee, Jeremy with Como News. How do these proposals navigate the potential conflicts with federal law regarding firearm sale restrictions?
So I'm going to ask the Attorney General to talk about that because we got a real expert here.
Thanks, Governor. And the question again was how these proposals
handle potential conflicts with federal regulation on firearm sales.
You bet. So a couple thoughts. Others may want to elaborate on it. But as an example, just taking a couple as an example, banning the sale of assault weapons. Multiple states have done that. Federal courts across the country have upheld those. They are constitutional, right? So that's something that's been done by other states. Courts have reviewed those, and they've been upheld. On the new proposal around liability, I think I mentioned there's a federal law that grants a lot of protections for these retailers and manufacturers, but that federal law does contain a specific exception if states choose to utilize it. So we're not simply proposing a state law that's in contrast or contradiction of that federal law, LACA. In fact, it is utilizing an exception that federal law contemplates and is explicit about, that essentially invites states to say, hey, if you want to provide that level of liability on folks who don't take reasonable steps, you can do that. And so like all things, there's litigation around those things. Courts have upheld those around the country. And so, as you might also imagine, my legal team is here. We are working carefully with our sponsors, the legislators, to make sure we are crafting this in a way that is consistent with that federal law. But it's important to underscore that federal law does contemplate. It has a specific exception for states who want to take the action that we're proposing today. So, long story short, we believe these actions, each of them, are very consistent with federal law.
Do you anticipate any precedent-setting challenges as a result of these new proposed Washington laws?
Yeah, so one thing that is certain is anytime the people of the state through the initiative process or the legislature take action on common sense gun reform, there's going to be a lawsuit challenging that. And That's just part of the way our system works, and that's appropriate. I can report that I think we have had 6 outcomes on different laws adopted by the people or by the legislature related to common sense gun reform, and on 6 of those, the record of my office defending those laws is pretty good. We've won all 6 of them. So we feel confident that we'll be able to defend these laws, but we spend a lot of time in the crafting and drafting of these to make sure we're doing that in a way that we think is consistent with law and is defensible when that inevitable lawsuit does come challenging those laws. Thank you. Yes, go right ahead. Yes.
It's been 7 years, as you mentioned, since you've attempted to pass this assault weapons ban. Just lessons learned along the way. What are the key reasons stopping the passage of this?
Oh, others I'm sure will want to weigh in. And I'll just offer a quick thought first. So yes, it's the 7th year on the proposal on banning the sale of assault weapons. A couple of things. I do feel optimistic about it this year, in large part because for each of the past 6 years, we are proposing that as well as banning the sale of high-capacity magazines. Both are, by any measure, heavy lifts and consequential legislation. And last year, so grateful the legislature adopted that ban on high-capacity magazines. So I think it's fair to say that there was a bit more of a focus around high-capacity magazines. You got to focus on your bill. That is now done. So I think that also creates some bandwidth to focus on this. And I do feel that there's just a momentum that's been growing with the people of the state, unfortunately in large part due to news that you read literally every day about mass shootings and the weapons that are invariably used in those mass shootings. And I think that as tragic as those outcomes are, I think it has galvanized elected officials, communities, students, you're hearing from folks, to push once again on that bill. So look, the last thing I'll say is getting any piece of legislation passed is always a challenge. There's so many proposals, so little time. But I feel optimistic this is the year that we can get this particular bill passed. But I'll leave it to others who want to jump in as well if anyone does. Jamie, you're giving me a look, so I'll turn to you.
Sure. So I'll just say that these bills, this whole issue of gun violence prevention, was an issue in multiple campaigns this year. And the people of the districts where those issues came up sent us a set of senators and representatives who believe in what we need to do in terms of gun violence prevention. So we are better situated, having gained seats in a year where everybody said that the debate about public safety was going to be about police. We elected gun violence prevention supporters, and we are going to be set up to be able to pass this stuff. And I think that it's a priority for our caucus. We've had those discussions. I think the House Democrats are in a similar position, so I feel optimistic. I just want to add on the previous proposal that the Attorney General was talking about. We are amending Washington's public nuisance law, which has been around since territorial days. And since the 1890s, we have imposed liability on people who manufacture and store gunpowder in a way that's dangerous for the people around them. So there is a long historical tradition in our state of holding businesses responsible for the damage that their products cause. And so to the point about conflict with federal law, I think we are squarely in that exception that was set up in PLACA, and I think have a good chance to provide a 7th victory for Attorney General Ferguson's office. Thank you.
I just want to add one more thing to that. The reason that we have a bigger gun violence prevention majority is because the people of Washington State have voted for these people on this issue. And we will continue fighting to get more and more gun violence prevention champions in our state legislature, in our mayor's offices, in our city councils, and in our county councils. So it is because of the people of Washington that this is happening.
And I'd also like to point out that people of color are disproportionately the victims of gun violence. And we now will have record number members of the Member of Color Caucus, the Legislative Black Caucus, and the Latino Caucus. And I think this year there's going to be an impact because of it.
You mentioned Representative Entenmann is here.
Representative Entenmann is here. I'd like to thank Commissioner Ed Prince from the African American Commission is here. We have a lot of leaders here in South King County. And as I mentioned before, it's of particular interest, I think, to people in South King County. No?
I have a question. So a lot of the bills have a lot to do with prevention and people purchasing a gun or assault weapon. Can you address anything around the bills that would have any sort of retroactivity? So people who currently have assault weapons or currently have a gun without a permit.
Well, that's an excellent question, and it is one that we did consider. We had thought about should there be some kind of provision that addressed those who own a gun, should they just be allowed to own it and not take it out of their home, things like that. Those discussions were very intense, and we decided to move forward with a clean bill that simply addressed prospectively. But I will say that I've been in talks with a colleague of mine in the House who is talking about a more narrow version of the registry bill that would apply to assault weapons only that people currently own. I think this is information that law enforcement would like to know, especially given the statistics about the likelihood of them being killed by an assault weapon. And I think that it just makes our communities safer if we know this information. So that bill has not been drafted yet, but that bill is in discussions right now with folks in the House.
Look, we all understand that these measures are not going to eliminate gun violence by next Wednesday. We understand that. And sometimes you get criticism when you start a journey to solve a problem. You say, well, it won't solve the problem tomorrow, so let's not start the journey. That's absolutely backwards. The longer the journey, the more important it is to take the first step. This is an important step. These are 3 important steps. They're based on common sense. We know they work. So we need to start this year in a clean way, and we intend to do it. Anything else? Any easy questions?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So I'm the mother of course Lorenzo Anderson, the young man that was murdered in Seattle CHOP. And so I'm trying to make sure, since we're talking about prevention work, how are we making sure what happened in a CHOP don't give us a CHOP too? So what steps are we taking and what actions are you guys taking to prevent that?
Well, one of the things we're doing is training more police officers so we can have more police officers who are available. Look, we have understaffing in many of our communities right now. So we, last year, and we will continue this effort, want to increase the criminal justice training centers so that we have more centers to be able to hire more well-qualified officers who are trained to administer laws with a lack of violence. It's very important. We're heading down that route. What else? Any other questions? With that, thanks a million. Happy holidays. Thank you.
TVW, bringing you gavel-to-gavel coverage of Washington state government.
Washington state has played a major role in reducing maritime industrial pollution. Now, the busy seaports in Seattle and Tacoma have made their own commitments to eliminate all emissions by 2050. Expanding access to shoreside electricity is critical to that plan. Plugging into shore power can cut about 25% of a cruise ship's total emissions